Okay. Hello, everybody. Let me make sure I can share my screen. I hope that you guys are all having a wonderful Saturday morning. I know that I am, and I'm super excited to talk to you guys today about a lot of the things that I'm super passionate about, including design thinking, social impact, and how you can kind of integrate design thinking into and social impact into your everyday lives and into your professional career. To briefly introduce myself, my name is Sam Stafford. I'm the incoming executive director of Self Fellowship, which is a 3-semester long, 8-week program that helps students engage in design thinking and social impact curriculum and hopes to open up and design their own social enterprises. So if you're at all interested, you can check us out at selffellowship.org, or you can message me on LinkedIn, or you can find my email in the chat right here. I'll just send it real quick. All right, so let's get started. Let's get started by talking about what social entrepreneurship is. I know that there are only 10 of you in here, but I'd love some engagement today. So if you have an idea of what social entrepreneurship is, or kind of want to throw anything out there, would love any guesses that you might have. Does anybody have any idea what social entrepreneurship is? Maybe. Ah, it's quiet today. No worries. Okay, I see a chat. Ideated ideated designated to promote social justice, similar to nonprofit, but do you have to have a revenue model? Okay, so all really good guesses. So basically, yeah, there's not necessarily one correct definition, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But let's kind of get into the objectives first. Understand the role and need of social enterprises in solving social challenges, gaining insights as to how social enterprises differ from other social change actors. You also are going to learn how social impact can be integrated into your professional career, learn the importance of research, and talk a little bit about the design thinking basics. So with that being said, what is social entrepreneurship? Social entrepreneurship, a definition. Again, there's no universally agreed upon definition, but at CEL, our definition is a process by which novel, innovative, and sustainable solutions are developed to meet social and environmental challenges. So basically, it's taking the components of business and taking the components of traditional entrepreneurship and thinking, how can we use social components and how can we use social initiatives in order to make this stronger? How can we take the tenets of entrepreneurship and kind of use them in order to create social change that is sustainable and meets a triple bottom line? And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But this differs from a social enterprise. Does anybody want to take a stab at how this differs from a social enterprise, or what's different about a social enterprise? I'm looking at the chat. Or if anybody else wants to unmute. Enterprise is not a startup. That's a good guess. Strategy, yeah. So basically, a social enterprise is an entity that aims to address a social challenge. So it's using the tenets of social entrepreneurship in order to basically create change. And this is all based on something that I talked about earlier called the triple bottom line, right? So is it financially, operationally, and environmentally sustainable? And we'll talk a little bit more about that here on the next slide. So financially sustainable. Is it able to support business and operations without having the support of external sources, having positive cash flows outside of donations? So this is something that we really, really stress in our fellowship, financial sustainability. As what differentiates, a traditional nonprofit from a social enterprise is that a social enterprise continuously has revenue models that's bringing in cash flows. So they do not have to rely on government grants and lots of different kinds of traditional resources like fundraising and those kinds of things. So essentially, their business practices allow them to be independent and allow them to create change through their specific practices. They also need to be operationally sustainable, meaning that they're able to exist without putting future potential resources at risk. So, using things like unnecessary plastic, or using things like that would operationally make their practices unsustainable. They also need to be environmentally sustainable. They need to have a net positive impact on the environments that they're sourcing from. This includes the environment and also includes the communities that they're serving. We want them to source ethical products, reducing carbon footprint, and ensuring that they're considering environmental factors when making business decisions. So this triple bottom line is really what differentiates people from social enterprises. Other businesses from other social enterprises. Does anybody have any questions about the triple bottom line or why it's important?
Do you have examples of companies that fulfill all three of these things?
I sure do. Yeah. They're coming up later. So yeah. But if anybody doesn't have any other questions, I can kind of move on to the next triple bottom line. Cool. All right. Let's move forward. So let's talk about the how of social enterprises. And this is kind of where we'll get into the nitty gritty of the different kinds of social enterprises and the different kinds of things that are being enacted upon. Here you will see the social enterprise metric by Nicole Motter, who is a really, really famous, great social entrepreneur who does a lot of work in the space. And you will see that basically social enterprises have a wide breadth of space in the business sector. So you have your traditional nonprofit, you have your non-nonprofit, you have your socially responsible business. You have a give one, get one, donate, which give portions of their donations to charity. And then you have a conscious company and a lifestyle brand. Is anybody familiar with any of these models, or maybe wants to take a stab at telling what their favorite nonprofit is, or a non-nonprofit, or a socially responsible business? Does anybody have any idea their favorite, or want to maybe shoot something in the chat? I'm opening it. Okay, totally fine. We'll talk a little bit more about them just right now. So let's first start off with the entrepreneurial nonprofit. An entrepreneurial nonprofit is a traditional nonprofit with an entrepreneurial approach, which means that it generates some revenue and/or innovative practice instead of traditional fundraising practices, meaning that essentially it is a nonprofit, so it's a 501c3, but they have something that is funding their initiatives, like we were talking about earlier. So an example that we have is Daily Table, which is a nonprofit retail store in Boston that sells fresh produce, groceries, and prepared meals at affordable prices. So this is what I was talking about earlier, about having these kind of initiatives intertwined within the practices that they do, right? So Daily Table is essentially very impactful because they're able to create an impact by just existing, by giving those prepared fresh meals at affordable prices in areas that don't necessarily have that are areas that are in food deserts, or areas that don't have a lot of grocery stores, or areas that don't have lots of access to good food. So just by merely existing and by doing what they do, they're an entrepreneurial nonprofit and don't require donations. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, cool. So let's talk about a non-nonprofit, i.e. a mission-centered nonprofit, but for-profit. So definition is that it generates profit and directly addresses a social challenge. An example of this is Everytable, which is a Los Angeles-based startup that cooks and delivers pre-selected fresh food at fast food prices. So very, very similar to a nonprofit, like to a for-profit nonprofit, or to an entrepreneurial nonprofit, but different because they're generating revenue that directly addresses a social challenge, rather than generating revenue in order to it's different because they're generating revenue that directly addresses a social challenge rather than generating revenue that just keeps their company afloat. So this is directly solving the social challenge that they're enacting upon, right? So it's a Los Angeles-based startup that cooks and delivers pre-selected fresh food. It gives people access to this food when they need it. And it also makes it so that they don't have to, pay a lot for good food, which is really important. Another example of a socially responsible business is a socially responsible business. The definition of this is that it's focused on the environmental, social, and financial returns, either through direct program or general ethical practices, which I know sounds kind of confusing. So let's kind of dig into some examples. We first have the Thrive Farmers Coffee, which is on a more mission-centric side. It basically connects farmers with a direct market through a revenue-sharing platform. And then you also have maybe some big companies that you guys have heard of before, Ben & Jerry's and Patagonia, which is on more of a better and build a better business side, which basically recognizes like that businesses can be really impactful in terms of creating social change. And that businesses need to do a really, really good job or need to do a better job of being socially responsible and by doing good things and by being good people. So by being big businesses and by being in those spaces where they can do things like pay their employees well and have diversity and inclusion programs and use good quality products and don't use a lot of plastic, it recognizes the role that businesses in society works to improve quality of life. There are a lot of these out there. Does anybody have any thoughts or any ideas as to other companies that you might be thinking of? You can throw them in the chat.
I think we had a question earlier. Someone was
Oh,
wondering how I think the nonprofits like get funding.
yeah, great question. So nonprofits get funding in a variety of ways. So if you've seen, let's use an organization on campus that everybody knows. Texas 4000. Texas 4000 is a organization that fights cancer. Oh wait, I'm looking at the chat. Does a carbon neutral initiative count for things like this, or should it be broader? Let me get to that question after. I answer this one. But the way in which nonprofits get money is basically there's a lot of different ways. So you can get it through traditional fundraising, you can get it through service initiatives. A lot of people will come up with pretty creative ways to get fundraising. So let's go back to the Texas 4000 example. They go on to Lamar every Sunday and they panhandle. So they go and they say like, hey, we're riding to Alaska to fight cancer. Like, do you want to, donate to us? And then they say yes. And then they give them a few dollars. That's a really, really grassroots way of fundraising. But then there are also more involved kind of different ways of fundraising as well. So you could kind of see that there are ways of fundraising, including like asking for grants from large companies or large federations. There are lots of different initiatives that are in place in order to build and support organizations that are doing good things, right? But the downside of that is that you have to rely on other outside actors and other outside forces in order for your change to be sustained, which is the biggest caveat in terms of a nonprofit. Does that answer your question? Okay, hopefully it did. Okay, cool. Thanks, Kyle. Okay, so does a carbon neutral initiative count for things like this? Yes, a carbon neutral thing does account for things like this. So it's anything that a socially responsible business basically puts out into the universe that's like, hey, we're doing this. We're going to be carbon neutral. We're going to hire predominantly people of color in our practices because we really want to be ethical in our hiring practices. This is something that there are a lot of different ways that you can be a socially responsible business. There are a lot of different ways that you can kind of show others that you are putting social and social mentalities first. But yeah, being carbon neutral is definitely one of the ways you can do that. So yeah, looking at the chat. Okay. Is it legal for nonprofit to raise money traditionally, like through a VC? Absolutely not. So a lot of times, actually, Kyle, this is a great question. So there are actually venture capital investment firms that are specifically for social enterprises, and it's actually what I want to do with my life after college. It's called social impact investing. So basically, there are these for-profit organizations that don't take stake in the company. So it's non-dilutive funding because it obviously is for a nonprofit. But then you can also take profit from you can also take percentages from the companies as well, because a lot of the times these social enterprises are making revenue, right? And they are traditional companies. So to answer your question, yes, simply put, you can raise money through traditional ways like through VC for sure. Does that answer your question, Kyle? Cool. All right, let's move on. All right. The next type of social enterprise, a give one, get one, or a donation or donate portion of proceeds. The definition is it can be any of these models, but donates proceeds or products. So an example of this is Warby Parker. They train local community members to administer eye exams and sell affordable glasses so that they can sponsor glasses to be given to another person who needs glasses. So it's basically buy one, get one, BOGO. Very, very familiar with you guys. Does anybody have any other ideas or any other companies that they understand has like a buy one, get one? There are so many out there. I know that it's early, so I won't hold my breath, but I will move on to the next slide and talk about awareness brands. Yeah, Tom's did do that. And we will actually talk about Tom's later in this presentation because it's very, very important. So yeah, awareness brand. Definition, sells products to raise awareness, no direct programs. Beautiful in Every Shade is an example. It's a brand that sells merch designed by local artists to broaden the perception of of beauty standards. So essentially an awareness brand is bringing awareness to an issue that they find really important. So Beautiful in Every Shade basically brings awareness by showing that, no matter your skin color or no matter who you are, you're beautiful. And they make merchandise basically to show that in order to advocate for that thought and advocate for that ideal. And that's an awareness brand. There are various types of awareness brands that are in existence as well. This is just the one that we were using as an example. So with that being said, there are a few others that include meaningful employment for disadvantaged populations, using market forces for goods. So an example of that is Bitty and Bo's Coffee, which is a coffee shop run by people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And there's also Fruitcraft, which is a California distillery, pioneering a pay-it-forward model that maximizes social value rather than profit. So these are just a few other social enterprises and social change actors that we love. I love Biddy and Bo's. It's a really, really great coffee shop, and they're doing really, really good things. So yeah, before we move on to the next section, does anybody have any questions? All right, let's move forward. So what do social enterprises do? We've talked a lot about like what they are and who they are and how they do it, but what do they actually do? Social enterprises are important they're important for social change because they combine bold mission with relentless and consistent innovation. So it's basically a bunch of people sitting down and saying, how can we integrate business practices and how can we make something sustainable that's going to create sustainable social change? And we address the root cause rather than treating symptoms. So we don't look at so this is one of my favorite examples. If you have a river, right, and you see that there are a bunch of pieces of trash floating down the river, and you're at the end of the river, right, and you're picking up these pieces of trash, and you're saying, oh my gosh, there's all this trash going down the river. But if you walk up like maybe a mile, you see that there is a trash factory that is taking this trash and throwing it in the river. The better solution is to take the trash factory and get rid of it rather than to sit at the end of the river and pick up all the trash. So when we're addressing root causes, we're going to the root of the issue rather than treating the symptoms of the root, which is really, really an important thing in terms of social entrepreneurship. And when and where social enterprise is needed, in collaboration with other social change actors, and when systemic change is needed. Yeah, so does anybody have any questions about that, or questions about my example about root cause? I just kind of went over something very, very complex in like 2 seconds. So if anybody has any thoughts or any questions, would love to answer them. Check in the chat. Looks good. All right, let's move forward. So avoiding pitfalls. TOMS, we talked about it earlier. So TOMS is a buy one, get one model social enterprise. They essentially had this idea where this guy was like, hey, there are all these kids in developing countries that don't have shoes, and it's preventing them from going to classes, and it's preventing them from being successful. So I am going to start this brand where I make shoes and I give them to children in need, and I subsidize this model by selling to people in developed countries and selling my shoes to people so that I can give a free pair of shoes to other people. It sounds good, right? Like, it sounds like a good idea. It's a buy one, get one model. It sounds like something that's effective. It sounds like something that'd be a really good thing. But there was a quick caveat here. And a quick thing that shows the importance of research in developing a social enterprise. So this guy who created TOMS went into these low-income communities in developing countries and gave all these people shoes, but little did he know that by doing that, he would be completely destroying the local economy. He basically disrupted all of the shoe vendors in the area, made it so that they all closed, and gave all of these children shoes that were really bad quality, that broke really quickly, and essentially ruined huge communities by trying to do something that was good. So all of this to say that research is exceptionally important. When you are trying to do social change, when you are trying to enact in social change, it is so incredibly important that you are asking what we call your beneficiaries, the people that are benefiting from your solution, to make sure that the change is not only wanted, but that is going to do good things. And TOMS is a perfect example of how good people with good intentions can do really, really bad things when the proper research is not taken into account. And let's talk a little bit more about beneficiary research, because it is literally the most important component of building a social enterprise. It is essentially the practice of thinking about who you are trying to serve and aiming your solution towards them, right? So a beneficiary is a person or individual or population that is positively impacted by the value created by an organization's intentional activities. So it's the person that a social change actor sits down and says, I'm going to serve this person. I'm going to, create a solution or help create value, through my organization, through these intentional activities that are going to support this beneficiary, this person. And all of your research should be targeted around these things. And that differs from a stakeholder, as a stakeholder is an entity that has a role or interest in the objectives and implementation of your social initiative, whether they're positively or negatively or neutrally impacted. So let's use a TOMS example for a minute. TOMS their direct beneficiary would be the people who are being given the shoes, right? They're the people that are receiving the shoes in the developing countries, whereas a stakeholder for TOMS would be a person in the US buying the shoes. They're not necessarily the direct beneficiary, but they are a stakeholder because they are what makes the grease of the engine run. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. So before you begin your research, it's important that you do the following things: that you evaluate your intent and your biases and your relationship to the space. It's important that you break down the stereotypes of preconceived notions you have about the community or the issues that you're going to be learning about. It's okay to be transparent with yourself about what you know and what you don't know, but the important thing is that if you don't know it, that you're upfront with yourself and that you continue to learn and that you're a consistent learner. And the other thing is that research is a never-ending process. You need to be willing to learn and rebuild what you know. And there's no such thing as being done with research, right? Because there's never, ever, ever enough research. Your beneficiaries' lives are continually changing. They're continuing to be different. So you need to be a consistent learner and learn throughout the process. And there's no end date to that. My phone is ringing. I don't know what's happening. Sorry, y'all. My mom calling me. Sorry about that. Okay, but good stopping point. Because now we are talking about design thinking, which maybe you guys have heard of before. Does anybody know what design thinking is or have an idea of what design thinking is? I see Anna typing in the chat. Okay, let's check it out. Thinking about design. Good. Wait, Didi, what's up? Sorry, did you have a...
I saw someone raise their hand, but it's gone now. So
Okay. Human-centered design, double diamond. Heck yeah. Sounds good. Yeah, that's pretty good. It's pretty good quick explanation. But yeah, let's talk about it a little bit. So design thinking is iterative. It uses design thinking methodology in a series of cyclical steps. It is human-centered. It requires an understanding of people, users, and beneficiaries, kind of like we talked about before. So lots of research, lots of different methodologies. And it is also a process. Design thinking sometimes is defined in 3 steps, often 5, but occasionally ends up in 7. And it's an ideology. It says that a hands-on, user-centric approach to problem solving leads to innovation, which then leads to differentiation and a competitive advantage. So it's basically a way of thinking about things. It's a way of solving problems. And Cell has its own kind of way that we do things. So it starts by framing a question. You find a beneficiary and you clearly define the problem that you want to tackle, right? So what is it that you're wanting to do? What is it that you're wanting to change? What is the question that you're wanting to answer? It can be a variety of things. You can literally use design thinking for anything. But then you always go back to empathy. Always go back to empathy. You build empathy by researching your target area and interviewing your beneficiaries by need finding. So you take this question and then instead of answering it on your own, you use your beneficiaries to answer it and you see what they say. And then you ideate. You brainstorm and come up with various ideas to solve the problem. You say yes to everything. You look at your beneficiary data, you look at your research, you fill holes, and then you basically figure out how you can be a change actor by ideating and by imposing new solutions. And then you prototype. So you learn from your ideation, you build a rough prototype to learn and explore your current ideas. So you build what's called a proof of concept and a minimum viable product, which are essentially the very, very basics of your idea built out. And then you test and learn. You refine ideas by gathering feedback and implementing and experimenting and moving forward. So you take that prototype and then you test and learn how you can make it better. And then you frame a question again. It's a cyclical process. So you basically take what you learn, you take the test that you did, and then you see how you can improve it and ask that same question, need find again, ideate again, prototype again, test and learn. It's a cyclical process that happens over and over and over again until you find your unique idea. But again, research never ends. So you're consistently researching in order to find this idea. I know that I just went over that very quickly, but does anybody have any questions about the process or how it can be used? Or can I clear anything up? All right. With that being said, this is the last slide and perhaps most important slide, creating impact, space for impact in your professional career. Obviously, not everybody is going to be a social entrepreneur. Everybody's not going to be doing things that are socially impactful, because if they did, then there wouldn't be any other jobs. So the important thing is that you are taking the tenets of social entrepreneurship and you're taking the tenets of social impact and incorporating them in your professional career. It's important that when you do anything, that you're using empathy, that you're going back to your beneficiaries and the people that you're serving always. What is it that they want and how can you really serve them? That you're using design thinking, that you're using that empathy in order to build impactful designs, and that you're using design thinking in order to do really impactful, good things. And then also beneficiary and market validation. How is it that your beneficiaries feel about your solution. Is there something that you can do in order to make it better? And consistently going back and getting feedback is so important. And how can beneficiary research strengthen your work? Consistently doing research is something that is very, very important and that you will see will really strengthen the work that you do. And also how to be socially mindful. Consistently, we want to avoid saviorism, right? So as social change actors, we don't want to walk into a situation and say, I am a social entrepreneur. I am going to change your community, because that's not what we're going to do. We're people that are passionate, that want to help, that want to collaborate rather than consult on what we think is best, right? So the most important thing that you can get from this is to avoid saviorism, right? You can still be impactful. You can still do good things without coming off as a savior. We really, really at the core root of things want to collaborate with our beneficiaries rather than consult them on what we think is best. We want to build solutions with them. And with that being said, that is all that I have. And I am super excited to take any questions that anybody has or talk about anything at all. So yeah, that's all from me.
Thank you so much. I guess we can just like save some time for any questions, and I'll keep us recording. Yeah, if nobody has any, I can take us off record and also just like chat.
I had a question.
What's your
Okay.
question?
Okay. Hi, sorry. Yeah, I was curious, like market validation. Like I'm very familiar with the traditional path of entrepreneurship where you validate your like target audience, right? But like for example, not Tom's is a good example. But like if the other end, like the beneficiaries are kind of in like a very, far away location, how does one go about like validating the beneficiary?
That's a really good question and something that people struggle with all the time. The way is by being creative. It's about finding untraditional methods in order to get market validation, in order to get feedback. So a lot of our fellows will turn to like Instagram in order to find beneficiaries that they can help serve and help get feedback from. But the most important thing is that you're creating consistent pipelines with them, and that you are asking the same people that you researched with about your proposed solution so that you can see how you can grow in your market. Does that make sense, Joyce?
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense.
Okay.
And then another thing I was curious about is like what are like success metrics that social entrepreneurs use instead to evaluate their like whatchamacallit, their kind of startup essentially, right? Because their venture is very different from a traditional one. I feel like, sorry, this is like a new topic for me, so I'm just curious.
Sorry, y'all. My computer. I just realized that my computer is about to die, so I'm going to plug it in real quick. Can you ask that question one more time? Sorry.
No, yeah, I'm just curious, like, because you also mentioned like social impact investing, and I think that's something that I was really interested in too. Not that I know much about it, but I was just curious, like, how are the success metrics different from traditional entrepreneurship when it comes to social entrepreneurship? And like, as a founder and as an investor, what are the success metrics kind of that you look for in the firm?
Yeah, so that's a really, really good question. Arguing impact is something that is talked about a lot, and something that is very, very widely discussed, because it's difficult to kind of quantify your impact, right? Because a lot of impact is very fluffy. A lot of it is not very data driven, but it can be very data driven. So there's something that we call, so I'm sure that you're familiar with return on investment, ROI. In the social entrepreneurship world, there's something called social return on investment, in which you basically take the components of your venture or components of your social change and you quantify them, and then you put them over the values that you're putting into the venture, right? So the amount of money that you're spending, the amount of hours that you're putting in, and you're basically taking this is a very complex concept that I'm trying to figure out how to explain in like a few sentences. So forgive me if it sounds kind of confusing. But basically you're taking your metrics, you're quantifying them, and then you're dividing them by the money that you're putting in. So that's something that you can use in order to basically convey value and convey how impactful your venture is. That's something that you use, social return on investment. You can also look at things like a logic model or theory of change. And a logic model is basically a 5-step process where you take the inputs, the activities, the outputs, the outcomes, and your impacts of your venture, and you put them in this matrix. And then you see like, okay, what are my inputs? What are my outputs? Like, how does this kind of, like, what is the story of my venture? And then you use those metrics and then you put them into your social return on investment. So that's something that a lot of social impact VCs will use in order to convey their impact and show kind of how they are creating change in the space on a monetary approach. So in the same way that you get a monetary value for return on investment, you get a monetary value for social return on investment. So you get like, for every dollar I invest in X social enterprise, you get $7 of social return on the long term and on like a wide scale. Does that answer your question?
No, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's really cool. I didn't know there were such cool frameworks in place.
Yeah. Okay, I see 2 chats. Kind of like this. Announcing the Salesforce.org community impact report. Yes, so a community impact report is definitely another thing that you can use. Sell actually has its own community impact report. So you basically take all of the things that you do, all the things that you've achieved, and you put it into a big form so that you can show other people what you do and what you've done to be socially impactful. And an impact report is a really great way to do that as well. I'm not sure you put that in the chat. Kyle, yeah, great example. Definitely another way that you can argue impact as well.
Also, just curious, like, what do you, how do you get into social impact investing, and like, what does that career path look like?
That's a great question that I wish I knew the answer to. Because I'm trying to figure it out too. There are a lot of small boutique social impact investing firms that do a lot of really great work. And so you can like intern with them. Like the traditional, that's kind of an oxymoron. There's no traditional path to social impact because like the career path itself is so kind of like up in the air and new, like it hasn't been around very long. So whereas like consulting and banking and more traditional business like entities have more traditional pipelines for getting into the field, like social impact isn't really that linear. But I think that to answer your question, it all just kind of starts with being passionate and showing that you're passionate about things and that you want to do good things, because as long as you want to do that and as long as you show that, then you're never going to go wrong. Does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah, it does. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
cool. And then also there are consulting firms that do social impact as well. So Bain has a subsidiary within it that does social impact work. And then there's also a company called Bridgespan that does social impact consulting and nonprofit consulting. So there are a lot of different ways that you can kind of get involved. But yeah, anybody have any other questions, or am I supposed to be, should I like do a little dance or something?
I think I'll take us off of YouTube, and then if anybody wants to stay and just like chat, that is awesome.